Welcome back, everybody. This is a new episode of 99 Media. Today we have the big pleasure to have back with us Vijay Prashad, one of the most important anti-imperialist thinker of our time. With us there is also Gabriele and Giuliano. Welcome back, Vijay, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
It's great to be with you. Pleasure, yeah.
So, firstly, we wanted to ask you about the one of the biggest news of the last weeks, because there is this request of admissions by Indonesia in the BRICs Plus group. And so, yes, could you deliver us an analysis about this request?
Well, I mean, it was inevitable that it was going to come because Indonesia is one of the world's largest countries. It's almost between somewhere around 280 and 300 million people, a very big population. It is one of the world's fastest growing economies. Currently, by nominal GDP, I think it's somewhere around 15th largest economy in the world. You take it to purchasing power parity, it's going to come higher than that. But it's also growing in its economy. It is a large producer of nickel. This is important for the whole electric situation in the world. You know, we're moving away slowly from the old combustion engine, which used carbon fuels, to electric fuels. You take the city of Shanghai, 40% of all cars are already electric. Nickel plays a big role in this. Indonesia, one of the world's largest producers. You'll notice that the BRICS has been quite strategic in its partners. Initially, in the first intake, BRICS took in almost all the major oil exporting countries. The only one that was not taken in was Venezuela, and that was because Brazil had blocked it. But, you know, they have all the major oil exporting countries, and now it looks like they are beginning to take in the large economies in the world that are producers of raw materials for electric, you know, and Indonesia is one of the leaders here. Also, and this is the last point of importance, despite the fact that the Indonesian government is, you know, by the consequence of the coup of 1965, it's a government basically of the right. You know, all the political parties are basically of the right. Nonetheless, it's a government that's been pushing for its own sovereignty. So on the question of nickel, the government had made a very important and interesting announcement saying that, you know, we don't want to export raw nickel. We want to process our raw material. We just don't want to be exporting the raw state nickel. And this is interesting because it shows that Indonesia was kind of walking along the trajectory of the other BRICS states, which also made it clear that they just don't want to remain raw material exporting countries, but want to become industrial powerhouses. So for this reason, it was almost inevitable that Indonesia was going to join the BRICS. And well, you know, there we have it. Indonesia is now a BRICS member.
I would add, Vijay, that in this process of, emancipating from just exporting raw nickel, China had a huge role, no? So when they start to talk about these restrictions and imposing to exporters to invest for processing nickels in Indonesia, they had like rough answers from global North multinational corporations, and instead Chinese that maybe was importing more nickel than the others, I guess. I don't know this data, but I guess. But has been very collaborative in the sense of making a huge investment in Indonesia. So they had like a tip, a clue of the different approach from China versus the others Western country. Do you think that these has, make Indonesian political elite understand that it was not just a geopolitical, question, but it was also very different model of the countries you work with.
Well, it is interesting. It is to a great extent because of the close relationship, economic relationship between China and Indonesia. But I think this also has to do with the fact that Russia has the presidency of BRICS, and President Subianto of Indonesia and Mr. Putin have a very close relationship. I think Russia has appreciated the fact that countries like India, Indonesia, and so on haven't gone against Russia on the Ukraine file. And Professor Subianto is one of these sort of plain-speaking people. I mean, here's the thing. For people like us, we don't often in international relations take personal relations seriously. We think there are more bigger structural issues and economic things and so on. All of that is true. Our general framework of analysis is very true. Nonetheless, these personal things play a role, particularly, I think, when we regard, the Asian countries where the personal connection is a big deal. And Subianto and Putin have a personal connection. Other countries, Saudi Arabia was actually holding back because, all countries have to agree. But eventually, with enough pressure from Moscow, this went through. So I would say, yes, China and Russia sort of pushed the Indonesia membership into BRICS basically together. No, not together. They didn't do this as a kind of in a kind of alliance together, but both with different reasons, had reasons to bring Indonesia into BRICS.
And what do you think are the consequences? I mean, we are in a phase, a time where the biggest power, global power, the US, is, just trying to forget the globalization process and all the multilateral kind of organism. And this, extension to Indonesia, that is, a huge country, so it's very an important brick in the BRICS. What do you think are the consequences of this news?
It's very interesting because we can look at it from many points of view. We spend an hour just talking about this. This is going to have a knock-on effect on Australia. Australia is the largest trading partners, China, both directions. Australia's major close trading partner is Indonesia. There's a lot of trade that goes back and forth with Indonesia. Now, with Indonesia within the BRICS alliance and Australia getting dragged further and further into the West's Cold War against China, with the AUKUS agreement, with the its old, Five Eyes intelligence agreement, with the expansion of the runway at Darwin Air Base in northern Australia, where they're going to have US nuclear aircraft positioned and so on. This is going to put countries like Australia in a tough position. What we're seeing, and I think what we can already, draw a line under, is that Asia is beginning to slip away from the control of the United States. It is losing. It's losing basically its position in Asia. The failed coup d'etat in South Korea suggests that the United States doesn't have the kind of control over the situation in Asia that it might have had previously. Let's see what Japan does, given that now Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh, they're all major trading partners of China and or BRICS members. India no longer such a subordinate ally of the United States. Asia is being lost as a continent to US control. And countries like Australia, Japan, South Korea, they are going to really have to think hard. Is their political future more important than the economic future? And so I think the entry of Indonesia into the BRICS project is going to create problems. I mean, as I say, number one problem is for Australia. What is Australia to think now that its two main trading partners, China and Indonesia, are within a circuit that doesn't include Australia? This is a serious issue. The RCEP, the largest trading bloc in the world, is in Asia, and countries like Australia have had to engage RCEP. But what will they do now with the BRICS expansion?
And for what regarded the nickel, no? Because do you think it could have some consequences, like we have already seen, that Trump also, I mean, an ideological, very strong point of MAGA and all the word, the cultural word that is supporting Trump is going away from the green agenda. And so the drill, baby drill slogan, and also the role that the fossil raw material have in trying to have a more balanced commercial balance with Europe and other exporting countries. Do you think that the fact that now we not only have a huge producer of fossil fuel inside the BRICS, but also of material that is, strategic for the ecological transition, will push more Trump in the direction of leaving the green business away and focusing more on the old fossil fuel business?
I mean, he's going to face some reality because, US car manufacturers don't just manufacture for the US population. They have to export their cars to Europe, to Asia, to other parts of the world. And increasingly in other parts of the world, the habits of driving electric vehicle or hybrid vehicle is increased. People don't want to drive big, giant oil using cars. That's just not there anymore. There is a market. I mean, let's not pretend in Europe there'll be a market. There are the MAGA type people who might want to drive a giant American truck, but most people can't. I mean, European streets require smaller cars. That's just a fact. You have an old civilization. You need cars to go through your old Italian streets, for instance. You can't drive a giant US gas guzzler through them. Those cars are better propelled by electric. It's just a fact that electric can manage a car like that. As I said, in China, the transition from fossil fuel to electric vehicles is dramatic. I mean, it's happening very fast. BVD, all these Chinese brands have swamped the market. They are not buying imported electric vehicles. They're producing their own electric vehicles. So, Trump's drill, baby drill is okay for perhaps the domestic US market, but it's not going to be good for US business because they are going to have to transition. The international appetite has shifted. They will have to transition. Now, will this put pressure on Mr. Trump? It's not, he is a practical person at one level. These kinds of statements also shouldn't be taken too seriously. I mean, his principal ally is Elon Musk, who pioneered in the United States the electric car, Tesla. So these are practical people. They understand how the economy works. They're not idiots, but they also understand politics, and they understand that drill baby drill was an excellent slogan to win a kind of position against liberals. I'm not sure that this is exactly what they will sustain once in office. They're going to have to confront the fact that the electric vehicle expansion has taken place in Asia and other parts of the world. They're going to have to come up against that. Volkswagen in Germany is going to have to confront this. They've closed 2 factories, which are basically victims of the Ukraine war. Volkswagen produces a lot of cars in China, including electric cars. How are they going to manage their business? These are businesses. These are not ideological. And push comes to shove. You're going to have to deal with Indonesia and its nickel. You're going to have to deal with lithium manufactured elsewhere and so on. So yeah, these are realities. Yeah.
Talking about BRICS, is Indonesia in the same position as Turkey?
In what way?
About BRICS, the adhesion. So,
I mean,
Turkey.
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. Tell me.
No, Turkey is Western.
About the status,
Yeah,
about
yeah.
the official status
Yeah.
in this
Adhesion.
admission
So
process.
Turkey is a Western ally, but is observer in the BRICS. Is similar?
Well, no, because you see, firstly, Turkey has played a very interesting game in the last 20 odd years, under Mr. Erdogan. There's been, when Mr. Erdogan first won office, people used to say, and I think New Left Review ran an article with the headline "NATO's Islamists," something like that. But Mr. Erdogan was smarter than that. He played a long game. He has built up a very large base among small manufacturers, industrialists in Anatolia, outside Istanbul, in the big landmass of Turkey. He underneath his politics was always a very fierce nationalism. This whole issue with Syria. So much of it was merely Suleiman Shah's tomb, which is inside Syria, and Suleiman Shah was the father of Ertugrul, the founder of the Ottoman Empire, and getting that was very important. Mr. Erdogan has pushed a Turkish nationalism, which is different from the kind of politics of NATO. The primary politics in Turkey is Turkish nationalism. NATO is just what they're in. I think they understand that they are a NATO member, but NATO is not a defining feature of Turkish politics. That's been very clear in their little tussles with the United States, with their dealings with Russia and so on. Dealings also with Central Asian countries. Turkey has contested Russia in Central Asia, and Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. These were all areas where Russian influence was primary. Turkey went and contested Russia. So, Turkey has played an interesting game. It's not super pro US. It's not, defected into the Russian orbit or anything. We saw this with the conflict in Armenia and Azerbaijan. The Turkey and the Russians were not necessarily all rowing in the same direction on all these conflicts. Yeah, they had differences of opinion and so on. They are playing a very interesting, game of their own on the Asian continent. But Turkey's interest in joining BRICS, I think, is economic. I mean, Mr. Erdogan understands and realizes that Turkey is a producer of sort of mid-level manufacturing goods, and its principal market is, in fact, the Arab world. That's the principal market, and I think they're also aware that they didn't want to be outflanked by Egypt's entry into the BRICS. We shouldn't underestimate these regional rivalries. When Egypt was coming into the BRICS, this was something Turkey would not have accepted, that Egypt would gone in but not Turkey, because that would have lifted up the presence of Egypt. And given that Egypt is largely a client state of Saudi Arabia now, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, both in the BRICS, but Turkey outside poses a challenge. So I think sometimes these little regional things play a big role. But Indonesia is not a kind of Western ally in the same way as say Turkey is a NATO member. Indonesia has played for at least since the 1990s its own storyline. Indonesia began to become a major trading partner with China. Has very close connections with Southeast Asia. Is not even the relation between Indonesia and Australia soured over the question of East Timor. They had initially they saw things eye to eye on that. When Australia decided to become critical of Indonesia. This soured their relationship and so on. So these are countries, okay, I would say I agree with you. Turkey and Indonesia are similar because both are countries that are in the middle of a journey. They are both journeying to seek out whether their kind of nationalism has a place on the planet Earth. These are mid-state nationalisms, let's call them. They are mid-state nationalisms. Indonesia is a very large country. It has a population just slightly less than the United States. Very large country, very large landmass as well. Okay, it's an archipelago. It's not one big. But if you go from one end of Indonesia to the other, it's very large landmass, and they have a huge cultural diversity and so on. Linkages to India, linkages to Cambodia. So I would say, in the sense that these are two countries that are on the move. Yes, they have a great similarity.
I mean, after joining the BRICS, no, Indonesia had, in a very few weeks, had high-level military negotiation with the US, so which seemed to dampen enthusiasm, somewhat. But shortly thereafter, it undertook under other similar negotiation with China. I mean, how do you? What's the difference between these two different negotiations? I mean, what do they imply? And what we can learn from these two other news about this journey that is still going on.
Yeah, it's very hard to read into these military cooperations because the end of the day, when the United States does these defense cooperations, half of them are about sale of military hardware. These are not really, this is not a military pact. Yeah, this is a defense cooperation. Indonesia buys a lot of helicopters, buys planes, buys all kinds of things from the United States. These defense cooperations enable military sales.
Sorry, Vijay.
Yeah,
they had also some kind of drills, no? Or is it true?
Yeah, but let's come back to the drills in a minute. Just to establish the point about the military sales, some equipment cannot be sold unless there's some sort of cooperation agreement. So if the American arms companies are eager to sell, let's say, helicopters, then there's pressure on the U.S. Defense Department to find a way, and there's pressure on the Indonesian military to find a way to have some sort of military cooperation deal so that the arms deal can go through. I think we shouldn't overestimate these defense cooperations. It's not a military pact. It's just a defense cooperation, and often it's to settle an arms deal. Now, these military exercises are interesting. So, if I made a database of all the military exercises conducted over the last year, firstly, we would be shocked at the number of them, because there are so many. And secondly, it would be shocking to learn who sends ships to whose military exercise. It's pretty astounding. Indonesia has been, and Singapore and others have been doing naval exercises with the United States in the Indian Ocean for now, I think, almost 2 decades, I believe. India as well participates in these exercises. What are these exercises? So initially, the excuse for the naval exercise was piracy, because there were pirates in the Straits of Malacca. There were pirates later, Somali pirates off the coast of Somalia. And in those exercises, the Chinese ships also participated. And China, in fact, participates in the UN mission against the piracy off the coast of Somalia. But these exercises initially have as the excuse piracy. Now, I have been of the view, and I might be an outlier here, that even these naval exercises are about sales of military equipment, because the United States has a term of art which it has used for decades called interoperability. 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 It's a very complicated term. What it means is that if you do a military exercise with the United States, you have to have equipment that somehow is interoperable with the US military equipment. It has to be, in a sense, in sync with US military equipment. Well, the best way to be in sync with US military equipment is to buy US military equipment. So, in many ways, these giant military exercises are also an arms dealing, like a festival of arms dealing. You know, it's an arms fair where you get to see the latest in US military and naval equipment, submarines, and so on. And to be interoperable, you buy their equipment. So again, let's not underestimate the commercial side of these military drills and so on. What we haven't seen is Indonesian ships and so on participate with the US in the freedom of navigation exercises in the South China Sea. In other words, they are not willing to put their naval vessels into direct confrontation with the Chinese. That is different. You know, the British have been doing it, the Japanese to an extent have done it, and so on, but not the Indonesians. That means they're not willing to put their ships into a direct confrontation with the Chinese vessels or with the Iranian vessels at the other end.
Vijay, I wanted to ask you something about the last Tricontinental essays titled Towards a New Development Theory for the Global South, because I started reading it last days. And yes, I wanted to ask you what's the main thesis of this interesting essay?
Well, there are two theses, and by the way, I'm hoping that this text will be out in Italian quite soon. Hopefully, I'll try to persuade our friends at the Fondazione Feltrinelli to publish it somehow, because they are interested in this new development theory, study. You see, number one is it's pretty clear for us now that the old development theories that have been operating, whether modernization theory or the IMF's, let's call it the neoliberal theory, the debt, austerity, growth theory, these have not worked. No country has been able to grow sufficiently based on these theories. It hasn't worked. It's not been effective. Okay, so what remains? Well, we decided to look and see using hard data. We built a very large data platform called Global South Insights, which very quickly is able to use all kinds of databases, the IMF, World Bank, the various statistical things, industrial databases, and so on. We put them all into one system. And we looked at the major economies in the world. And what we found was that those countries that have been growing pretty fast, Vietnam, China, including India, to some extent Indonesia and so on, these countries are growing not because of the entry of foreign direct investment, money coming in. That was one of the IMF's recipes, is try to attract foreign direct investment. We found that foreign direct investment is not actually a determinant of the increase of the growth rate. What we found instead, and this was an ultra high correlation, that means we're almost 100% sure that this is why these countries are growing. These countries are growing because they've increased their fixed capital. In other words, their net fixed capital formation has increased. So, every country has a quantum of fixed capital, train lines, buildings, all of that. Yeah. And every year there's some depreciation. So some of the net fixed capital erodes, a bridge has a crack in it and XYZ. So net fixed capital is the increase of fixed capital over depreciation. So if you have 100 in fixed capital and you depreciate by 10 to 90, increasing your fixed capital, you'd have to go to 110, not just to 95, because that's a -5. You'd have to go to 110 or 105 or 101 even. Yeah. So you'd have to go. So if you increase your net fixed capital, that is ultra high correlation to increasing the growth rate. And that is one of the reasons why Western economies are not growing. Their net fixed capital is decreasing. We're seeing that. I mean, when I was last in Italy, I could see the infrastructure is deteriorating. The train stations look disastrous. Trains are late. Things break down. I mean, that's the net fixed capital. As anecdotally, yeah. Secondly, we were able to find that when GDP per capita increases in a country, life expectancy increases. This was a surprise to us, because generally you think, okay, listen, if you build malls, why should that increase life expectancy? The quality of the GDP should count. You should have to build hospitals and schools. But in fact, the data shows that any growth increases life expectancy, which leads you to the third point. Higher quality growth improves social indicators even more. That means if you focus on building hospitals and schools and high-speed rail, the quality of life will improve even more. That's in a nutshell 3 points for a new development theory. Now we are trying to build on this insight. And so this dossier is the first stab at introducing these 3 points. Number one, that growth happens when net fixed capital formation takes place. Second, when net fixed capital or net fixed investment increases, then you have higher life expectancy. And if you increase the quality of net fixed investment, that's what we're studying now. I mean, I don't know if it's true. Like maybe we build hospitals and it doesn't increase anymore. But I believe that's a prejudice. But we're studying it, that if the quality of net fixed investment increases, does the social life improve? Obviously, we believe that intuitively, but we want to see if the data supports that. Yeah. So that's a development theory. That means countries should not be wasting their time trying to attract foreign direct investment, which is just going to go into speculation and all kinds of nonsense. Countries need to attract serious investment that is going to improve the infrastructure and so on, which is going to have a direct impact on life expectancy and this, that, and the other. Countries that are rich, okay, like Italy is a rich country. Yeah, it's a rich country which right now doesn't harness its resources. Like you are allowing your rich people to basically keep their money, and private sector and rich individuals do not build infrastructure. They hoard their wealth for future generations, or they consume, but they do not invest in infrastructure. You're not going to see anymore. Yeah, there are no great philanthropists like in the Middle Ages. Yeah, in Italy, you had great philanthropists. Yeah, they made a lot of money, and then they built palaces, and they built whatever things that became museums and beautiful whatever. No, they're not doing that anymore. The rich are not building big rail lines. Where is the rich person saying, I'm going to build a rail line from Milan to Rome, which is going to improve rail transit for all people? Nobody's doing that. They want to use the public sector infrastructure for private gain. They may build a private train line. In other words, a private company to run trains on public sector infrastructure. But they're not building infrastructure. That's the difference. Virgin runs trains in England on public infrastructure. Virgin Atlantic is not building infrastructure. So, we have to change our thinking about development. Development is not going to happen by giving tax breaks to the rich and letting them go out there and squander wealth. development happens when serious infrastructure is built, or what we call net fixed investment.
Very, very interesting. No, I wanted to ask, no, because in a little essay we have published like last year's, no, for this developmental theory, we had a brick that is not the role of technological transfer, no, like the idea was we without having done a numeric studies as yours, that is very, very important, and we appreciate it so much. And I hope Feltrinelli will publish it in Italian, because, and we will invite you to present it in Italy, because it's a very huge topic. But where you had some investment in fixed capital, because I mean, you need it in order to improve the productivity of small industrial investment you have done. No, you need roads, you need also public schools, you need also, but when you don't have also some mechanism to have a technological transfer, then it arrives what we call the middle income trap, because as long as you are submitted hierarchically to the core, to the imperial core, and so you are just a do you say subfornitore si dice subforniture? So someone who depends on other. Okay, you can also develop, and you can also develop fixed asset capital, but just as long as you don't become a competitor, no. So and so the biggest part of the profit still goes, also if a small part goes in improving the fixed capital assets, the biggest part go to the imperial core, so that the gap, the technological gap, instead of diminishing, continue to grow, and so this is the mechanism. And what happened in China that is very different from all the other paths is that, together with this improvement in the fixed capital assets, you had also a technological transfer where the gap was diminishing instead of continuing to grow, and then there you find independence, and with independence you find capital to continue to grow, and don't be trapped in the middle income trap. It's something that, I mean, it sounds reasonable to you in your model?
Well, firstly, for most countries in the world, they would welcome the middle income trap. Most countries in the world are raw material producers, and the middle income trap would be paradise. Yeah, so we should accept that. Secondly, the Chinese experience is interesting, because China produced a model for its takeoff that is worth a serious look. What did they do? See, most countries which liberalized the economy said that the price for entry into our country is bring investment. Yeah, you give us investment, you can take advantage of our labor and so on. It was investment for market access. The Chinese said technology for market access. Unless you give us the technology, and that too not just tech, because technology in a very crude way is yesterday's science. You have to give us science for market access. And if you give us science for market access, then you can come and set up your factories. You see, people in the West that criticize China, saying, you know, they're selling out to capitalism, they didn't understand the kind of plan that these people had. You know, they knew they needed technology. They didn't want to get wiped out, with big smokestack industry and so on. They needed advanced technology. They couldn't access it. You know, they were not able to develop it indigenously. They got it from the Japanese, they got it from the Germans, from other places. But they said to them, you want access to a huge market, give us the science, give us the technology. And now what's interesting is, as China is working with a number of countries in Asia and Africa on their development agenda, they are saying industrialize. The Chinese are telling Zambia, industrialize. Don't just sell us raw materials. And they are saying, in order for you to be involved with our economy, we would actually like it if you adopt higher technologies. We're going to give it to you. Why? Because China wants to move up the technology ladder. They don't necessarily want to, let's say, process nickel. They want Indonesia to do that. So they are happy with industrialization taking place in these countries. They don't want to hoard, and they don't want Chinese companies to run the industries in Indonesia or in Zambia. They want those countries to do it. So yes, it's true that there will be some time where these countries will get caught in a middle income trap. That's absolutely the case. But we're going to have to see if the attitude is different. If, in other words, technology transfer is a part of the process of the so-called win-win economic relations, we're going to see whether this middle income situation is a trap or it's a stage. And I think that's the difference. We used to think of it as a middle income trap because there was no, once having reached a certain point of, let's say, industrial development, there was no opportunity to advance to a higher stage of industrial development. But perhaps we are not any longer in a module of traps. We are in stages. And I think the Chinese are very interested in a kind of stage development. By the way, this logic was developed by the Japanese. It was called the flying geese model of economic development. The lead goose has the lead technology, and then it keeps sending the technology back down the chain. By that logic, there has to be a lead goose. Maybe eventually we'll come up with a world trade model where there is no lead goose, where it's a much more complicated setup, maybe. But it's going to take us time to get there. For practical people, can't happen overnight. Overnight, Indonesia cannot produce, like microchips. It's not going to happen. It's taking China a very long time to get to producing microchips. So it's not practical to say, can Indonesia produce everything? It's going to have to trade. And it's going to be in a middle income situation for a while. Now, again, to repeat, is it a middle income trap or a middle income stage? I think that's where we're going to have to see. We don't have enough evidence yet to solve or to answer that question.
And I would add that from this point of view, it could be that's show us how important multi-alignment could be, because if you are not, you can ask, you can try to put the countries that are technological more advanced in competition between, if they want to have some influence, if they want to have, good commercial relations, they have to they need to give you also access to technology. Otherwise, you go to the competitor. That is why multi-alignment could be could be a kind of solution to the middle income trap that has always existed when there was just one center of power that has the technological leadership. No?
This is why, and interestingly, this is why the United States at some level needs to relax. In his last press conference, Mr. Biden said, there's a competition in the world. Yeah, he kept talking about we are winning the competition. There's no competition. I don't know what he's talking about. He didn't say it. Obviously, he's referring to China, United States, and so on. It's ridiculous. Why not struggle to improve your own economy? Why not struggle to improve your trading position vis-a-vis other countries? Why is it a competition? Why can't you have several major countries that are the lead goose? And why can't this competition help us improve the means of production, the process of production? Why can't this competition help us advance to better forms of high-speed rail, better uses of energy, and so on? Why is it? Why is this competition a negative thing? Why is it a war? Why does it have to go to military, and so on. Why can't it be about trying to improve the conditions of people's lives? Let's have a race. Who can end poverty first? Let's make a race like that. That's far better than who can build a bigger bomber. So the United States needs to get a different attitude going. The Chinese have made it very clear that their military is for defense. They are not interested in going and invading the United States. The US needs to relax a little bit.
May I ask you about Indian and Chinese development? Why this process is so different?
There, the answer is pretty straightforward. In China in 1949, you had a socialist revolution where the Chinese took very seriously the democratization of the countryside. Look, they made enormous mistakes. Okay, the Great Leap Forward didn't quite work out. The Cultural Revolution, mixed feelings about that. It was quite a disaster in terms of the intellectual capacities of the country and so on. On the other hand, it renewed emphasis on the role of the countryside. But they democratized the countryside. They got rid of social hierarchies. It was a country with terrible hierarchies. People had to bow to each other. Women were wearing cloth to bind their feet and so on. They abolished all of that. They accelerated to universal education. They accelerated to basic health care and so on. These Mao reforms set the stage for what comes later, for the 1978 transformation. Without the Mao reforms, you don't have the social fabric for the 1978 transformations. In India, there was no revolution like that. The countryside remains undemocratic. That means the majority of people live in an undemocratic situation. Nutrition rates are low for the working class and the peasantry. If your workers, I'm just speaking now, let's take it from a capitalist perspective. If your workers are underfed, if they are sick, if the water supply is not good and they keep getting dysentery and other, waterborne diseases, this is a disaster for a high-tech company because, you've trained workers. You can't afford them to keep not coming to work, sick, sickly, not enough energy and so on. You need a robust workforce. I'm talking now just from the standpoint of capitalist firms. Chinese workers are healthier. They are more trained. They have better drinking water and so on. It's true. Look, when you're in any factory situation, it's pretty ugly. Okay, so it's true. In factory towns in China, there were often epidemics of suicides and this, that, and the other. I mean, which working class has said, "Yay, I'm working in a factory"? Okay, we are trying to advance to a socialist society where that condition of proletarianization is not permanent. Okay, we are attempting to go there. But let's also be very clear that if you're born today in India or in China, in the countryside, it's preferable to be born in China, where you are freer than in the Indian countryside. You are healthier. You have more nutrition and so on. I mean, these are the simple facts. It's got nothing to do with democracy or any of that. Political nothing. It's basic facts. You talk to a manager of a company in India, and they'll tell you directly. My workers are sickly. The public transport is terrible. These things make a difference.
Okay, thank you, Vijay.
I just, from this point of view, the last question is, do you think that the Modi government, the political situation now and this new world order that is, coming out from the loss of imperialism, and will give India a chance to reduce the gap with China and to work on these issues and start a real development and maybe repeating the kind of the development we have seen in China, or there are still very huge structural obstacles that that we need to remove before talking seriously about India as the new China?
Well, look, firstly, everybody wants to wish people the best in their endeavors. And I wish, India would succeed. I'm an Indian. I don't want to wish my own country ill. So I very much hope it will succeed. But on the other hand, I also think that India's growth over the last decade, and it has been actually pretty impressive growth, some of that is due to pent-up demand and due to pent-up infrastructure spending. For decades before, there has been a certain stagnation, let's say, in demand. I mean, consumption was low. Inside the country, there was a very small middle class. The Modi era was able to take advantage of some neoliberal policies. Neoliberal policies are very good at creating a middle class. They are not bad at that. They are good at that. They are able to create a middle class. The problem is that neoliberal policies cannot democratize the economy. That is not what they are able to do. Neoliberal policies in Italy, for instance, help enrich and enlarge the middle class. It's not that everybody got poor. There was an elite. Well, they democratized the elite in a sense. They brought in people into a middle class, service professionals and so on, had their situation improved. So in India, growth did happen. Pent-up demand is not insignificant. Generations of pent-up demand. And then infrastructure. Infrastructure was in really bad shape. And they spent on infrastructure. Now, they also did it through the private sector. There was a lot of public money used for private building. Mr. Gautam Adani, for instance, built ports in Gujarat using public money or public underwritten money. Not always just public handouts, but underwritten by the public sector. So, there has been growth and it has been impressive. But this growth is not going to democratize the economy. And that's what one was saying with the Mao reforms. The Mao reforms democratize the economy. You are going to see a growth increase in India. It's not going to collapse. It's not, I'm not one of those Marxists that always says the collapse is around the corner. You can see growth happening in India because there are spaces of growth that continue to exist. Infrastructure spending is still, there's room for it. But it doesn't democratize the economy. It generates employment, but it's an ugly employment. It's precarious employment. It's not employment that is improving the life chances of people, not only the workers, but their children. You're not seeing that. And that's a concern. And for that, I don't know what the answer is, but right now you are going to see growth. You are going to see populations feel like things are not so bad, better than before maybe, but it's not democratizing the economy. And that's a long-term concern. It doesn't, these issues of democratization of the economy are not in the short term. And you all know that democratic politics of a ballot box electoral kind, this kind of politics is all about the prejudices of the middle class, because the working people don't define electoral campaigns. It's a middle class dispute, bourgeois elections, a middle class dispute. And if the middle class is reasonably satisfied that things are going okay, then there is no constituency demanding the democratization of the economy.
Do you have other questions, Giuliano, Gabri? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Vijay. It was a pleasure, as always, illuminating as always. So thank you very much. I also thank you, everybody, for listening to us. And I'd say that we'll see you in the next episode of 99 Media. Bye, everyone, and thank you very much, Vijay.
Bye.